Hello, I'm Waffles Are Better. In this video I'll be showing you how to create custom generation noise settings for your dimension. So you'll be able to change what your oceans are made out of and also change what generates in your world instead of stone. So as you can see, currently I have my oceans set to be made out of ice, and it's harder to tell, but the block that would normally be stone in the overworld or netherrack in the nether is packed ice. You can kind of see that behind me in these islands and things. They currently don't look too good because they're a mixture of ice and dirt, but of course I will be making some more custom biomes and not be using any more overworld biomes, so that soon will not be a problem. So the first thing that you're going to want to do is go to your worldgen folder, and in there create a new folder and call this noise_settings. And then in noise settings, you want to create a new file, and you should just call this, I guess, the name of your dimension, and then .json. It doesn't really matter what you call it, but that's probably what you should call it. So the_frost.json is what I'm going to call this. So the first thing that you're going to want to do in this file is just make a curly bracket and then drop down a line. And then you're going to want to type in quotation marks, bedrock _roof _position, and then a colon after the quotation marks. And this number is the offset that the bedrock roof will generate from where it would normally generate. So if you set it to 0, it'll just generate at the highest block in the world, like how it does in the nether. And if you set it to another number, it will generate with that offset from that position. And so the number that the overworld and end use to make it so the bedrock roof does not generate at all is this. And this number is negative 2,147,483,648. And that is because it is the signed 32-bit integer limit. So basically this is the lowest number it can be, which means that the bedrock roof will definitely not generate in any way. Then after that, you're going to want to put bedrock _floor _position. And this is the same thing. If you set it to 0, the world will have a bedrock floor. But if you set it to this number, then the bedrock floor will never generate. So the next thing you're going to want to do is drop down a line again, and now you want to type in C_level. And this determines at what level the liquid in the world generates. And this is the default liquid you'll set later. But for the overworld, it is water, and for the nether, it is lava. And the sea level for the overworld is 63, and the sea level for the nether is 32, because that's the level that the oceans and lava lakes are at. So I'm going to go ahead and set this as 63. I just think it should be the same as the overworld, but you can choose something else if you want. So then the next thing that you're going to want to set is min_surface_level. And what minimum surface level does is it determines the lowest point in the world where surface blocks can generate. So by default, this is set to 0 for all dimensions. But if you wanted there to be like a minimum level where blocks can generate in your world, then you could set this higher, I guess. So next there's a bunch of easy ones. First one is disable_mob_generation. And then this is whether or not mob generation happens during worldgen. So like, for example, when you're just walking along and generating new chunks in the overworld, like sheep and cows and stuff will spawn. So I'm just going to put this as true because pretty sure that's the default. And then next is noise_caves_enabled. This is what determines if the 1.18 caves will be generating in your world. I'm actually going to set this to true because I like how those look. So then next is noodle_caves_enabled. And these are the really long, thin caves that 1.18 is going to add. So I'm going to enable these as well. And then next is deep slate_enabled. And this is exactly what it sounds like if the if the deep slate layer will generate in your world below a specific point, which is, I believe, Y16. So I'm going to set this to false, and then next is ore underscore veins underscored enabled, and this is not referring to the little clumps of ores that you normally find in your world. I think it's referring to the huge veins that they're going to be adding in 1.18 of like copper and iron, and I don't think I want this, so I'm going to set this to false. And then lastly, there's aquifers underscore enabled, and this is what's going to decide whether the 1.18 aquifers will generate, and those are going to be the basically just the big lakes that will generate underground. And I think I'm going to set this to false. I'll just test it out as true. Next thing you're going to want is actually the default block and default fluid. And these are what you're most likely going to want to use most in this file. That's the only thing I've really changed that much in this file before. Of course, default underscore block, and then you're going to want a curly bracket and then drop down, in quotation marks, name with the N capitalized, and then in quotation marks again, the block that you want it to be. So I think my default block, I'm going to try Minecraft, and then colon, packed ice. I might change this to regular ice, and I might change it to something else. But I think the packed ice would be really cool. What you might have to do, depending on the block, is type properties, and make sure the P is capitalized. And then this, with the curly brackets, is going to be all the different block states that you can have. So for example, like if for some reason you want your world to generate as fence posts, you have to say whether they are connected to the left, right, or front or back, or if for some reason you want it to be snow layers, then you have to say how many layers of snow you want it to be. That would just be in quotation marks the name of the property. So, for example, I believe that's layers for snow layers. If I was doing snow layers, and then a colon, and then in quotation marks, I don't know, 3. But since I am not doing snow layers, since pack.mcmeta doesn't have any properties, I don't need to specify the properties. I can just delete this. But anyways, what the default block is what most of your dimension will be generating out of. So for example, in the overworld this is stone, in the nether it's netherrack, and in the end it is endstone. So if you choose a different block, then that is what will generate in your world instead of stone, basically. Next is default underscore fluid, and this is basically the same thing except for, what would normally be water. And what's interesting about this is I'm pretty sure it doesn't actually have to be a fluid, like water or lava, because I've set it to air before, and that makes it so oceans generate completely dry, which you could also probably do by just lowering the sea level. For this, I'm going to put name, and then I'm going to try powdered snow. So Minecraft powder underscore snow. And then if you are leaving this as water, what you'll need to do is, as I said, properties, and then level, and then 0. But powdered snow doesn't have any properties, so I'm just going to delete that. So then next you're going to want to put structures, and this is not actually going to determine which structures generate, because that will be determined by the biomes. So for example, you do need to specify how every single structure would generate if it could generate in your dimension, but if your biomes do not tell that structure to generate, it won't generate at all in your dimension. And that's with the exception of strongholds. The overworld is the only dimension that tells the stronghold how to generate, because it's the only dimension that actually has strongholds. So you're going to want to put curly brackets and drop down the line, and then if you want strongholds to generate, then you want to do this next step, but if you do not want strongholds to generate, then don't do this. So stronghold, and then curly brackets, and you're going to want to put distance, which is, I believe, 32 for the overworld, and then spread, which is, I believe, 3 for the overworld, and those just determine like how far they are apart, I believe. I'm pretty sure that distance is the average distance between them and spread is the minimum. However, I might be wrong about the spread. And then count is by default 128, and this just determines how many strongholds will generate in your world. So then if you want to keep the stronghold, then just put a comma after this curly bracket, type in structures again, which I know is kind of weird because it's structures inside of structures. But yeah, you do need to do this. If you don't want a stronghold, because I don't want a stronghold in my dimension, then just delete the stronghold section. So then open up these curly brackets, and this is a part that, in my opinion, you should probably just copy from the overworld file. It doesn't really change much between dimensions, and you are going to need to have all the structures anyways. So, one second, let me just get that open. So as you can see in both the overworld and the nether, all of these different structures down here are the same, with exception for that the overworld has a stronghold and the nether does not have a stronghold. But like, all of these are the same, so you can just go in starting at end city and copy all the way down to here, and then go ahead and close this and just paste it like that, and that's just going to specify how every single structure would generate if it generates in your dimension. So for every single one, the name is the type of structure. So for example, if I go down to village right here, it just says village, and so that controls how desert villages and snowy villages and plains villages and any other type of village, even custom villages, will generate. So this is the same for all of them. The spacing is the average distance in chunks apart. So villages are normally about 32 chunks apart. And the separation is the minimum distance that can be apart. So villages can be about 32 chunks apart all the time, but they can be a minimum of 8. And then this salt is something I can't really find an explanation for, but I know it has to do with the random generation of the village. So if I were you, I would just leave this as the default. I don't know what changing it would do, but it would probably just change a bit how the villages generate. So then scroll to the bottom, and after this third curly bracket, but before the fourth, you're going to want to add a comma, and then type in noise, and then a colon, and a curly bracket. So in here, you're going to want to say min_y, and this determines what the lowest block in your world can be. So the absolute lowest it can be is negative 2048, but that might have some problems. So you should probably do negative 2032 if you want to make it that low. And this has to be a number that is divisible by 16. So like, for example, you can do negative 2032, but you can't do negative 2031. So by default, in 1.17, this is 0. But I believe it'll be negative 64 in 1.18 for the overworld. So if you want your world to generate down below bedrock, or below where the bedrock level usually would be, then just put the lowest point that you want your world to have. So for me, I'm just going to put 0 because I want it to generate with bedrock at y level 0. And then next you're going to want to put height. And what height does is it determines what the total height of your world can be. So this also needs to be divisible by 16, and minimum y plus height cannot be more than 2032. So the maximum for height is 4064 if your minimum y is negative 2032, or 4080 if you use negative 2048 as your lowest minimum y, which again might have some problems. So for example, the height of the overworld is 256, and in the nether it is 128. And that is probably going to change in 1.18. So for example, if your minimum y was negative 64, but you still wanted your top block to be positive 256. Instead of 256 here, you would put 320 because that is the minimum y plus the positive y. So the next thing you're going to want to do is type size horizontal, and what this is going to do is determine like how wide the terrain generates. So for the overworld and nether, this is 1, and for the end it is 2, because the end, it's like got wide and flat islands. So it basically just determines how like wide and flat everything is. So I'm going to leave this at 1 because I want to keep the basic overworld generation. Then you have size underscore vertical, and this is the same thing but for how tall everything is. So for the overworld and the nether, this is 2, and for the end this is 1, because the end is flatter and shorter and also wider and bigger. If you think about the end islands, they're pretty big and flat, whereas the overworld and the nether have like mountains and things like that. So I'm going to leave it as 2 because that's the overworld default. So the next is density underscore factor, and what this does is it determines how dense the world is, basically. So it changes the gradient of the terrain density from the bottom to the top of the world. So in the end, where there's floating islands, it has a density of 0.0, but in the overworld, where it's just completely solid, you've got a density of 1.0. And interestingly, the nether also has a density factor of 0.0, like the end. And I think that's because it's got a floor, so it doesn't generate like floating islands, but there are a bunch of like overhangs and things. And with the lava lakes at the bottom, it gets a little bit more open and stuff. So then next is density underscore offset. And what this does is it determines like how high the center of the density in the dimension is. So this is a little hard to understand. Basically, what the game does is it divides the density offset number by the density factor, and then it adds 1 to that, and it multiplies that by the height, which is 256, and divides it by 2 to get what the terrain height would be. So I think it's easier to just use the default overworld density offset, because that's probably what I want anyways, because I want it to look like the overworld. So that is what it is. It's negative 0.46875. But to find the density offset that you want to use, it's probably smartest to just use that equation, because if you plug this number into that equation and this number and the overworld height, so if you divide 0.46875 by 1 and then add 1 and then multiply that by 256 and divide the whole thing by 2, then you get 68, which is the average height for, I guess, the blocks in the overworld, which makes sense. The blocks in the plains are usually about Y68. So just take what you want to be the average height for blocks in your world and, do the equation backwards to get what you should put your density offset as. So next is simplex underscore surface underscore noise. And I couldn't really find a real answer for what exactly this does. It switches surface builders from Perlin noise to simple noise, but I'm not exactly sure what that does. I know it generates slightly different surface, probably slightly different features or something. I just know that this is true for everything besides the nether. I'm just going to put true, because that's what the overworld uses. And then these next 3 you can put if you want. They're optional. If you don't want to put them as true, then you might as well not even put them at all. So the first is random underscore density offset. Oops, I forgot an I there. The overworld is the only one that uses this. And so the overworld does have a random density offset. And I think what this does is it just makes it so terrain has a little bit more variation. And I'm going to keep that as true because, I mean, the overworld has it. But if you don't want it, you can just, delete this. But I'm going to keep it. And then next is island underscore noise underscore override. And this determines if it generates like the end with the island things. So if you put it as true, then then it'll generate like end islands. But if you put it as false or you don't even put it at all, then it'll just generate like the normal terrain, like either the nether or the overworld, depending on your other settings. And then next is amplified, and this just determines if the world is an amplified world. Since I don't want it to be amplified, I'm just going to not include that. The next thing you're going to want to do is put in quotation marks sampling, and then a colon, some curly brackets, and then inside of there, you're going to want to put xz underscore scale, and what this does is it determines like how intricate the horizontal shapes are in your world. So like if you leave it at 0, your world will be completely flat basically. And if you bring it higher, then there will be like more hills and things. So for some reason, the overworld default is this number, which is a pretty long number, and I don't know why it's this number in particular, but since I want it to look like the overworld, this is what I'm going to put. And the next thing you're going to want is y underscore scale, and what this does is the same as xz scale, except for height. So it determines, like, I don't know, how intricate mountains are and things. So for the overworld, it's the same as the xz scale number. And then next is xz underscore factor, and this just determines like how smooth the xz generation is, because scale determines how intricate it is, so like it'll have hills and things, and factor determines if those hills are smooth. So for the overworld, this is 80.0, and then next is y underscore factor, which is the same thing as xz factor except for the y scale. And for the overworld, this is 160.0. Then you're going to want to go after this curly bracket right here that closes sampling, add a comma, and then add top underscore slide, add a colon to that, and again, curly brackets. Then in here, you're going to want to put target, and what target does is it determines how much this affects the top of your world. If this is a positive value, like in the nether, it will create a roof, not the bedrock roof, but a roof of blocks, like how in the nether there's like a large layer of netherrack between most of the nether and the bedrock roof. And if this is a negative number, then hills in the top of the world will be rounded off. So for the overworld, this is -10 to get the rounded off hills that you get in the overworld near the top of the world. And for the nether, this is 120 because of the thick nether roof. And then next is size. And what size does is basically it determines how much of the world is affected. And there's a formula for this. It's size equals the height in blocks affected times 0.25 divided by size of vertical, which is up here. But generally, you should probably just choose the same numbers as the nether or overworld, because that's probably the generation you're going to want. So actually, for both the nether and the overworld, the size is 3. Then next is offset. And basically what this does is it moves the affected area away from the top of the world. So like if you don't want it to affect the exact top of the world, but you do want it to exist, then you change the offset number. So again, offset is height in box times 0.25 divided by size vertical. But that does not matter because for both the overworld and nether, the value is 0. So next what you're going to want to do is just copy all of top slide, including this curly bracket, add a comma, and then paste it. and then change the top in top slide to bottom. And so this is going to do the same thing, but with the bottom of the world. So negative values will make it so there is no floor and make like floating islands and like round off the bottom of islands like it does with the hills. And positive values will just make a floor to the dimension. So for example, in the end, the value is -30 because they've got all those floating islands. In the nether, it is 320, and in the overworld, it is 15. So I'm going to leave mine as 15. And then the size is 3 in the overworld, 4 in the nether, and 7 in the end. And the offset is 0 in the overworld, -1 in the nether, and 1 in the end. But I'm just going to keep the overworld settings because I like how the overworld looks. So the last thing you're going to want to do is go to your dimension, and then find where it says settings, Minecraft overworld, or whatever settings you had before, and instead change this to your namespace, which is this folder name right here, and for me that is Frost, and then the name of the noise settings file, which for me is named the_frost. So the_frost. So if I'm correct, if I do /execute in the frost, run TP there, and go into spectator, it should generate just like the overworld, except that there is packed ice instead of stone. So 1 second, let me just go into the caves. As you can see, we don't have any stone here, just packed ice. It is generating the 1.18 caves in my world. One thing it did not do is make the oceans out of powdered snow. Alright, I figured out what the problem was. For some reason, you can't have the 1.18 worldgen features enabled and also change the default fluid. So you have to, for some reason, you have to turn off aquifers and noodle caves and noise caves. I didn't test which ones you have to turn off, I just turned off all of them. I'm seeing one problem with having powdered snow as your liquid, which is that it doesn't seem to want to generate icebergs in it. It like generates them sometimes, but only small ones. But I think this is a really cool effect, at least. But I'm not quite sure I like this effect. I like that you can like sink into the ocean like this. But I think maybe I'd prefer it to be ice. Okay, the one thing I don't like is how it cuts off the land like this. And of course I'm going to need to make sure that lava lakes and water lakes don't generate in the ocean. Oh, look at this. Look at this. There's a mine shaft in the ocean. Wow. Like look at this ice. Here, if you're standing in the mine shaft, you can see up above the... I think this is really cool. Maybe I will keep this. That's it for this video. I believe that wraps up the tutorial series on custom dimensions. And by that, I mean actually making the custom dimensions themselves. Of course, there'll be more videos on custom biomes, and also I will make videos on like how to make portals and things. Lots of other things about your dimension. But I think this is the last video that's actually making your dimension a actual Minecraft dimension. If you have any suggestions about things you want me to do in the future, or other things you want me to cover, let me know those in the comments. And if you have any questions about anything that I covered in this video, you can ask me those in the comments, or you can join my Discord, which is in the description. At the time of recording, I'm almost to 90 subscribers, and that is ridiculous. I did not think I would come that far so fast. So thank you guys so much for that. I appreciate every one of you. Thanks for watching.